Yes.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and namaskar to all. First of all, I welcome all of you to this meeting, and on behalf of the Odisha Economic Association, I welcome all of you, especially the speaker of this evening, Professor Ashima Goyal, who is currently a member in the Monetary Policy Committee, who has the task of controlling inflation or inflation targeting, to be precise. And the detailed introduction we will have no later. And I also request the President of Odisha Economic Association, Dr. Jugal Kishore Mahapatra, the former Chief Secretary of Odisha, to preside over this meeting.
Thank you.
And today we are having the sixth memorial lecture uh, for Professor Adwait Mohanty. Professor Adwait Mohanty was teacher to, in fact, many of us. But I'm a direct student of Professor Adwait Mohanty, and Professor Adwait Mohanty taught us basically welfare economics. In my first year of PG, he taught us welfare economics, and in second year, he taught us international trade. Okay? And he was a great teacher, I would say. Uh, and then he also was greatly involved with the Odisha Economic Association. He was the president of Odisha Economic Association, and he was also the editor-in-chief of our journal that we have been publishing, that is Odisha Economic Journal, the present name. Earlier it was Odisha Economic Journal, which is also now 55 years old. Like our association also is completing 56 years. So the journal also is completing 56 years. And Professor Aditya Mohanty was editor-in-chief from 2018. But unfortunately, before he completed the first issue actually of the journal, he passed away in the month of October. That was actually unfortunate thing. And but then he was a great teacher and a great researcher. In fact, he was also the RBI chair professor at Utkal University, and so he had a lot of passion actually for teaching. And in fact, the best advice actually he had given to us was that as a teacher, when you go to the class, uh, he used to come with a white paper with some points as a note, and he would give the note to the students at the end of the lecture. And he told us that when you also become teachers, don't store these notes actually for future reference, because if you store these, then you will never come prepared actually for the class. I think I repeat probably this in every year's lecture, annual lecture. I fondly remember this advice of sir. And so I think many of us actually would have so many memories with him. And I think without taking much time about Professor Aditya Mohanty, I would now request the President of Odisha Economic Association, Dr. Jugal Kishore Mahapatra, to speak about actually Professor Ashima Goyal, the speaker of this evening, who is actually going to basically talk about misconceptions in Indian fiscal federalism. And so uh, I think I can announce that both are actually, the president and the speaker, Professor Ashima Goyal, are classmates of Delhi School of Economics. So that actually I came to know much earlier. So with that, I invite Dr. Jugal Kishore Mahapatra, the president of Odisha Economic Association, to introduce his friend and the speaker of this evening. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amarendra. Thank you for introducing Professor Adwait Mohanty to Ashima ji and the other participants. It gives me real pleasure to welcome Professor Ashima Goyal, a celebrity in the field, no doubt about it. Possibly the star of the Delhi School of our era. She's too well known actually to sort of say anything more about what is already known to all of you. Just to familiarize with you about her work, I think she was a postgraduate from Delhi School of Economics in 1977, went on to do MPhil in the same institution, and later on PhD in possibly from Bombay University. Am I right?
Right.
Yeah. And she has been teaching for a long time in the prestigious Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. Of course, she has taught in many reputed universities abroad in USA and other places as visiting scholar. Prolific, publisher of papers. Her publications, if you see, you would be amazed the kind of depth and the number of publications, well-cited publications he has. Special interest areas, macroeconomics, finance. Of course, fiscal policy is something that she has also, not many people know that she has had a keen interest in fiscal policy as well. She has published a number of very important books. Many of you would have consulted these books. She is also an editor of some prestigious journals in the field of macroeconomics and finance. But I think she has excelled in all three, domains that any economist would like to excel: is teaching, research, and also public policy. She has had the experience of working in several very high-level committees. She was a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Currently, she is in the Monetary Policy Committee. All of you know. And she has also been in several other government committees as well. I mean, she is in the field of public policy also. She has that extensive experience. So possibly she has a 360-degree view of what a practicing economist can do with her intellectual prowess. So I think we are absolutely fortunate that she is delivering this special lecture in memory of one of our very, very dear members, very humble teacher, extremely genuine human being. And more than anyone else, I think I'm delighted that she is going to deliver this lecture. And I'm sure all of you would realize why she is so much revered by all in the fraternity. Thank you very much, Ashima, for accepting our invitation. And now I would request you to deliver your special lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Jugal, for that very kind introduction. It's really nice to be with an old friend. And thank you and the Orissa Economic Association for the invitation. I was very happy to see how active the association is. And as I was saying, I've had a number of PhD students who studied in Orissa and have their grounding there, and very impressed with how well-grounded they were. So I really respect the teaching part of being an academic, and so I'm happy to be speaking at this to learn about Adwait, Professor Adwait Mohanty's, how his students remember him, and to contribute to his memory. So now I will share a slide. And also, this topic I've chosen is the first time I'm talking about these ideas. And I visited Orissa in December, and before that I've been seeing Orissa in the data. And we find that it regularly tops all the state rankings on so many parameters. And I saw for myself when I was there, I was very impressed with Bhubaneswar, how clean it was, how well organized. So here I'm going to be comparing across different states, and I would be very happy to get your feedback and to learn from you what is it that has made Orissa special, and how other states some things that other states can also do. So I look forward to your feedback also. So can you see the slides now?
Yes.
Yes.
It's the first time I'm using Google Meet, so I'm sorry that I can't see you, but anyway. So do stop me if you have any clarificatory questions. We'll take substantive questions at the end. So just to give a brief overview, we all, India's federal structure, there's sometimes a confusion whether we are a federation or a union. So I think that my understanding of the literature is that we are our constitution is that we are one country of many diverse states, but not a union of many countries, like the European Union. So we do have a federal structure, and we have constitutional institutions that keep the country together. These days, there are many emotive issues that are kind of misconceptions. One, I'm going to be discussing a few of these. One is that the idea that states should have more freedom to tax and borrow. They are unnecessarily restrained. That states get less than their fair share of central taxes. And third, that richer states lose in our federation since they have to make net transfers. So in order to distance from the emotions and come to the facts, I'm going to try and benchmark with other federal countries and also see what the data shows. So these are the rights that states have. But then what are the responsibilities? So we look at some of the consequences of choices of different states in the data, their debt, their investment, the public services they provide, what is the variation across states, and finally, the way forward. How can we, as India grows, starting to grow faster, the states must have to participate in this, otherwise we cannot do it. So what are the new priorities, norms? What are ways to motivate more participation in and the creation of opportunity? So first, to talk of briefly the structure of federalism in India. We have an independent constitutional body, the Finance Commission, appointed every few years, with the mandate to achieve uniform public services through the country, with transfers to attain both vertical equity between the center and the states and horizontal equity across states. But starting at independence, the early period, when we had a planned economy and we had those 5-yearly plans, securing finances for these plans took priority. And so India was surprising in the sense, compared to other countries, that our democracy had full political inclusion. But economic inclusion was lacking. If you define economic inclusion by equity of opportunity, by equity and access to education, to health, to good air quality, these are public goods that were neglected and are still neglected. And this neglect hurts the poor more. And these kind of public goods are best delivered at the third tier. But decentralization to the third tier, to the urban local bodies, to the panchayats, has been patchy in India. And overall, very heterogeneous levels of development persist across states. Now, in this equity of resources, devolution of central taxes is a right states have. But the formula on which this devolution has done changes with every finance commission slightly, but after extensive consultations. But there are also grants that are given, and conditionalities can be imposed on grants. The Constitution gives overlapping responsibilities to some own responsibilities and some overlapping responsibilities. And as we've seen, delivery has been inadequate in providing uniform public services. So the center has many centrally sponsored schemes in which states participate. They have the option to participate or not. But and these are grants, part of full. And in some ways, they substitute for the lack of devolution to the third tier. But there are inefficiencies in this, and most states would prefer a free hand. They would like just the money to be transferred and they can do what they want with it. But then each individual citizen has a right to uniform public services. And if for so many years after independence, this uniformity is not there, and today it's especially important to build human capital, then we need to think about how this provision of services can be improved. So let's come to those misconceptions, to the rights, the perceptions, and the contrasting the perceptions with the facts. This idea that freedom to tax and borrow is restricted for Indian states. The facts are that the restraints are among the least severe in the Indian federal structure. When you look at outcomes, India's subnational debt averages 28% across the states, and it is the fourth highest in the world. The OECD developed country average is only 20%. Then the second fact is that most states in a federal structure that borrow in the market have a very high yield spread. If Orissa, would have a very low spread because it has very good finances, while country and states that are highly indebted should pay much more. But this spread is the least in India throughout the world. It's the state development loans. It's almost the same rate across states, and it's very near the rate at which central government borrows. In Mexico, for example, the spread is 4.5, in South Africa 1.5. So states get this other advantage because the RBI has something called an automatic debit mechanism which warranties state borrowing. So again, states have an advantage that subnationals in other countries don't have. Moreover, if you look at the theoretical principles of federalism, there's a tie-out effect, which is about the principle of subsidiarity. Income taxes, the most elastic taxes, such as income taxes, have to be with the center in a federal structure. Because otherwise, if states start competing in offering different types of or levels of income tax, there will be migration and a lot of across states and a lot of volatility. So income taxes are allotted to the tax rights are allotted to the center, but the finance commissions decide, an independent body decides how this tax should be shared across states. This is in line with theoretical principles of federalism, best practices. Then there can also be macroeconomic instability if subnationals can borrow however much they like, whether internally or externally. This used to be there in countries like Brazil and Argentina, where there were unconditional central bailouts after states decided how much they needed to borrow. And we all know that in this period, Brazil and Argentina had 1,000% inflation. We've just seen what happened in Sri Lanka, where debt ballooned. So we cannot afford that. We need some sorts of restraints on state borrowing. And yet in India, about half a dozen states habitually exceed the mandated debt limits from the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which is 30%. And then there are the state's own tax effort. A lot of state taxes are allotted to states, but they are very uneven in actually implementing. I had done some research with a student, Sandhya Garg. This was published in the Public Tax Review in 2016. And we found that, and this time the FRBM had just been started and we were investigating how effective it was. This is a very rigorous study panel. And what we found was that controlling for tax capacity, that is the share of agriculture, infrastructure that decides how much tax you can. So looking at a stochastic production frontier, most states were far within the frontier. They were not raising as much tax as they could. And we found that this tax effort decreased with federal transfers and it increased as FRBM was implemented. So some kind of discipline is required so that states contribute more fully in the tax effort. Moreover, recently, as we've moved to GST and after the compensation period was over, there were a lot of worry when compensation would stop. But we found that state GST is very elastic. there's a very large rise in revenues currently from state GST, and the rate of growth is really it's increased from 2.6 trillion in 18 to 8.4 trillion in 24 budget estimates. So 18% double-digit rate of growth. And actually, the elasticity is more than that of the center. But it depends on how much effort each state puts into collecting state elasticity. So, state tax GST. So, again, tax effort matters there. Now we come to the second misconception, which is that states don't get a fair share of resources. The center has the most elastic taxes and it keeps too much to itself. But again, when you look at the facts, the state spending in India, the share of resources that goes to them is higher than in most other federal structures. The general government expenditure, states get about 64% in India over the period 15-20, and but other countries this is about 40%. Canada is the only exception, the federal countries, which has about 60%. But states themselves raise only less than 40% in own taxes, so they spend much more than they tax. So where do they get the resources from? There is a transfer of resources to states, and we've seen a steady rise in this over the different finance commissions. From the 1st to the 10th, only central income and excise taxes were shareable. But in 2000, there was an amendment to the constitution, and all central taxes except cess and surcharge were made shareable. The share was around 30% then, and the 15th Finance Commission raised it to 41%. So, but the actual share has been of central resources has been about 32% since the early 2020s. Now, we often hear states complain that what the center has done is they've raised cesses and surcharge which are not shared, and this is unfair. But the point is that the center makes many additional transfers to states. These grants are transfers, different kinds of grants. And so while tax devolution is about 3.5% of GDP in 22-23, central grants were 3.2%. So it's not only the taxes that are shared. Even if the center is raising more, it shares this with states as through the grants. And even the 14th Finance Commission, people often quoted that they increased the tax share, but the center has not followed that. If you see their right, what they have written is that they did not expect that they agree that the aggregate share of states is very high compared to most federal countries, and they did not expect this aggregate share to rise. What they wanted was a fall in these centrally sponsored schemes and a rise in untied, more predictable tax devolution in the transfers from the center, so that states have more say in what they do with the money. And this was a time there was a lot of discussion on restructuring CSS, centrally sponsored schemes. They were very unwieldy, a huge number, and they were restructured and streamlined. But since conditionality remained important for public sector delivery, aggregate CSS rose, and these cesses and surcharges helped to finance it. And the other reason cesses rose in this period was really the counter-cyclical taxes on oil. Now, the states also impose their own excise on oil. The center has its excise on oil, and this rose after oil prices fell in 2014, and was one reason the cesses increased. States also raised taxes on petrol, and so they gain from it also. And again, we see that a large part of the state revenue receipts were from grants, 21% compared to 26% from tax sharing. And sometimes the other complaint one hears is that these are central schemes, the center gets credit. But again, this is not true. When I read, I find that in Orissa, for example, where there is a very active political, local presence, there's much more awareness about state contributions. Bihar is another state that gets a lot of money from grants because they have a low per capita income. but they have shown the greatest progress over the last few years in this multidimensional poverty reduction. And they have used central schemes with add-ons and customizing it and making these state schemes, making these known as state schemes. So states have the freedom to do that. Just recently, I believe Nitin has been pushing Ayushman. He's renamed it Mukhyamantri Arogya Yojana or something, and really actively enrolling people in it. So it depends on what the states do. Now let's just look at some of this data. This is for Australia, for Brazil, for United States. Everywhere we see that the government, central government spends about 60%, states 40%. The same is for Indonesia, also the other large emerging market with the federal structure. Brazil and Indonesia are these two. But India has the reverse. So the facts show that actually our states get much more resources from the center than most other federal structures. Then the third misconception, which is very current, currently it has a lot of, is this thing about the direction of resource flows, that the richer south and west subsidize the poorer north and east. And this is really attempt to fan a north-south divide in the country. But in a fiscal structure, net resource flows have differed in the past and will change again in the future. And states gain much more than just resources. They participate in a vibrant, growing common market. We've seen the consequences for Britain of exiting the European Union. They get protection. India is in a very fragile. We have nuclear armed Pakistan next to us, and for national security and so many purposes, we do much better when we are together. So this attempt to create a divide that the richer parts would be better off by themselves is very, 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 very pernicious. And again, when you look at the facts versus the perception, I collected a student, Shritama helped me, with data from 4 populous northern states, Bihar, MP, Rajasthan, UP, and 4 southern states where there's an opposition government, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and looked at transfers. And we had some very interesting results. So what we find is that conditional payments, grants, go to more efficient states. And some of these southern states are more efficient. For example, recently there was a study in the Indian Express which showed that 4 southern states get more than 50%, have more than 50% of Ayushman patients and financing. And reason is there's a paper in EPW which shows that states with better medical facilities are able to use more of Ayushman. We just saw about the enrollment drive in Bihar. So it depends on how actively you enroll patients in this. So looking at these transfers, does it show a bias against the South? We see that the share of total taxes is falling. And these are formula-based taxes. The formula is decided by the Finance Commission, and it gives a dominant weight to equity. So therefore, we see that the share of taxes going to the populous northern states has been rising, the blue line in the first graph. And not so much that it's rising, but that the share going to the south has been falling. But you come to the second figure, figure 2A, and you see that the share of grants from the center to the south, the blue line, has actually been rising in recent periods, while the share going to the populous states is constant. And so therefore the total transfers, third figure, shows that the total transfers are constant, the share of total transfers for the south, the 4 southern states. So this is, very contrary to what is written in the newspapers. And when you look at per capita transfers, since the northern states are much more populous and the southern states are more prosperous, on equity grounds, you would expect the north to get more. But again, you see that grants per capita, although total transfers per capita, even total transfers, but grants going to the south are much higher than to the than to the north, grants per capita. So this is the effect of rising conditional transfers. And so when you have, agitation against conditionality in transfers, and you have agitation that resources are going more to the north, then it's inconsistent, right? The data shows that conditional transfers actually result in more transfers to the south. So that is about rights and what the data tells us about it. Then we come to responsibilities and outcomes. And here we just look at some of the data. Now this is from the RBI, has been doing a very good job in putting together data on state finances. And you see the outstanding liabilities as a percentage of gross state domestic product. The red, we see from 2014 to 2024, the state, the red lines, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Haryana, but Haryana only exceeded 30%, which is the FRBM limits in 21. But many states have been persistently above 30. And Punjab is there, West Bengal, Kerala. So these states, when you look at their expenditure on development as a percentage of GSDP, on social sector expenditure, and then capital outlays, the third column. This is 21-22. We are showing, and in 2024, FY24, the budget estimate. So we see that all states spend more on development and social welfare, but capital outlays, that the states that have higher debt tend to have much lower expenditure on capital outlays. And the green line is Orissa. We see that it's doing very well on all fronts and has one of the highest capital outlays. So that is the advantage of having low. We see the green line in the last table. Orissa has very low debt as a percentage of GSDP, one of the best. It's only 13% to 14% in the budget estimate, one of the lowest. Yeah. So that shows in these capital outlay figures. And another interesting thing, if you look at this table, I don't have time can't spend a lot of time, so I'm going quickly. But you will see that budget estimates of states, very often they are not realized. Actually, realized estimates are much lower in many of the expenditure categories. And the greatest shortfall is in capital outlay, because this has the least committed expenditure. You're committed to pensions and other kinds of expenditure you promised different political constituents. So, but what you can cut is capital outlay, and you do that when you are indebted and you have high stress, your revenue deficits tend to be high. So we see that these states with high debt tend to have high revenue deficits also. And while this is not fair to other states, often the Finance Commission gives revenue deficit grants, but again, these seem to be swallowed without changing the underlying status. And this is not fair to the states themselves, since what happens is that interest payments take up more and more of their receipts. For example, for Punjab, the share of receipts going to interest payments is as high as 22%. In Orissa, it's less than 4%. So it's not fair to their own citizens, because when they cut expenditure on capital, cut investment, then we saw that high debt and low capital outlay is correlated, because capital outlay is the least committed. This can lead to a low growth trap. And that means people are poor and you require persistent transfers. While countries with states with low debt has high capital outlays, help reduce poverty persistently. So as I said, I would like to hear from Odisha, from the economists here, that what from my reading, it seems to be that Odisha has done particularly well in expenditure management. But the composition of expenditure becomes more and more important as we look to the future. Development of good human capital, skills, innovation. So education has to have priority. And here I was just learning about the problems in state universities, how the very, very excellent traditions are in some danger. So it's not only a question of funds very often, it's independence is necessary, better governance. So smart spending as well as high spending is required. So what is the way to achieve this high spending, smart spending, spending on ways to persist, to raise human capital, to improve public services, which is really important, especially for the poor. So we find in the past that conditionalities, although states don't like them, they do work. Because, for example, the 12th Finance Commission first gave some incentives for states to join the FRBM in terms of lower interest payments. And for the states that joined, it really reduced state debt. And other states, such as West Bengal, did not join for a long time. Then they saw that other states had benefited and they joined. Then 13th Finance Commission had conditional grants to the third tier because states have not devolved funds and functionaries as they were supposed to under the 73rd and 74th Amendments of the Constitution in the early 90s. And then to get the panchayats functional, Finance Commission and central grants have played an important role through this period. But the 14th Finance Commission argued that conditional grants reduce utilization because some panchayats can't satisfy the conditionality. So they rather chose to make payments for capacity building. But capacity building can't be allowed to take 10 years, 20 years. How long? It must be done. So conditionalities are important to make this happen. So the 15th Finance Commission again had conditionalities and some weight for tax effort. As we saw state capex, after the pandemic, we saw state capex was really low. And then the center started this conditional interest-free loan. It's a long-term loan, so it's almost like a grant. And as a result, we've seen very high capex growth in states from FY23 and continuing in the budget estimates. But again, we see a lot of variation across states. While UP has a really high capital expenditure, Punjab, Kerala, it's very low. Now in Karnataka these days, as we saw, because they are a prosperous state, large state-owned taxes, but their capital expenditure has fallen below the budget estimate. Because, when you choose to, we all know about the water crisis currently. There you need investment, better governance, all kinds of reforms. So free bus rides can't substitute for the provision of water. As I was saying, conditional grants to the third tier. I was just reading a recent RBI document report on panchayat finance. Apparently, 95% of their funds come from grants. And the conditionality and use of high technology. There's an e-Gram Swaraj, which is online accounts, and about, I think, 250 lakh panchayats out of 255 total now have this, although all of them don't have the accounts available every year. So you can see that the conditionalities are delivering in some improvements. And the 73rd and 74th amendments had posted some 29 delivery items for local bodies. And in this, water and sanitation were among the top, health, education, all this. So these water and sanitation account for 60% of central grants. But a lot of states, the political competition have been focusing on freebies instead of providing these kind of public services. And I define freebies as recurrent handouts that sustain dependence and poverty, that do not help to build human capital or improve infrastructure or the environment. So, and the worst type of freebies are where there is distortion in prices and as a result in resource allocation. And we have seen a lot of this in the electricity sector. where the first flat rate tariffs were given to Andhra Pradesh farmers in the 77 elections as an election winning ploy. And this spread was adopted by all parties, spread to so many different states. And I think Punjab has been the worst affected by this, where rice cultivation in a really hot summer, overuse of water because of free electricity results in burning of crops in order to clear them and all sorts of, and it's directly responsible for the smog that Delhi sees in November. So, these kind of policy decisions have huge costs, many of which are not measured. Punjab also, it's tragic because this excess water has resulted in leaching of chemicals from the soil, and it has a largest number of cancer cases. It's really very, very tragic, the consequences of these policies. And we see that majority of the distribution company, there were a lot of reforms in electricity starting from 2000s. The aim was to reach electricity to every household, a lot of investment in production by the center, but the discoms at the state level remained unviable. And there were repeated schemes and central bailouts with poor moral hazard, so the problems continued. Then in 2015, they aligned discom finances with state finances. So there were special state bonds to cover 75% of discom debt. The aim was to shift to direct subsidy to poor consumers rather than go through distortions in prices and but unviable tariffs, low investment, poor maintenance continued. And since banks were dependent on states for many of their investments, they could be arm twisted to continue to finance. Now, in the mid 22, something called the late payment surcharge, the central Ministry of Electricity implemented rules, and one of the penalties was progressive withdrawal of open access to states that delayed payments. And by March 2023, outstanding dues had dropped 39%. Because it was not possible to arm twist the central networks, the states found the money and they paid. So it seems that discipline imposed by independent central and constitutional institutions does work. I was happy to read in a recent Livewint article that there is some rating agency that rates discoms, and 15 out of 55 discoms have been rated A+. Their finances, that means they can, spend in meters, in actually measuring electricity, and stop the leakages that are responsible for a lot of the problems they have. So, and this is a table from the net state domestic product, and this just shows the share of state GSDP as a percentage of net state DSP coming from the transport, storage, communication sector, and that was subsidy on products. And again, you see that the subsidies, now the subsidy can be high as a ratio to NSDP, but it will be low. The highest subsidy is in Uttar Pradesh because it has the largest population, so total subsidy is highest there. But as a ratio to NSDP, the highest is in Madhya Pradesh. But the states which have high subsidy, this is subsidy on products that is measured in the NSDP. State subsidy is different from that. That figure is available with the RBI. It's the highest in Tamil Nadu, very, very high. But this subsidy on products is one of these which distorts prices and resource allocation. And it's in most cases there's a correlation with the poor performance of transport and so on, where these subsidies impinge. So again, the idea that subsidies on products distort resource allocation. So I'll just conclude by summarizing. I think I'm more or less used my 40 minutes. So contrary to perceptions, Indian states get more resources and freedoms than in most federal countries, but spending is of poor quality in some states. Some fiscal restraints on states are necessary for macroeconomic stability. FC transfers are formula-based and settled after intensive discussions. The new round of discussions is starting with the 16th Finance Commission. And many factors are taken into account in these formulae, but equity has a dominant share. So, in the net, more transfers go to poorer states. Grants can include conditionalities, and they seem to go to the better performing states and also help in inducing better performance and compensating for some poor spending choices of some states. So they help states escape low-level traps and distorting choices, and should continue to be priorities for the 16th Finance Commission. But in addition to incentives, generally voter awareness, moving away from dependency towards demanding better public services is very important to enable participation in the creation of new opportunities in a growing India, and to participate in these opportunities. And other reforms such as convergence to best practices, what has worked in different states. I would like to hear from the economists here what has worked for Orissa, which is one of the star states, best performing states. So what improvements in fiscal systems are possible, use of technology in taxation, expenditure, management, better decentralization and devolution of funds and functionaries. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Goyal. I think extremely insightful presentation, and very, 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 in the context of the 16th Finance Commission already set up, and the newspapers and other publications coming out with all kinds of issues, you have taken them head on, and particularly some of the more controversial issues which have been flagged. I think you have provided lots of very interesting facts which do challenge some of the popular misunderstanding we have about resource sharing in a country like India. And I'm sure participants have benefited a lot from your very well-researched presentation, though within a very short time, you have given a very panoramic view of how resource devolution has worked, in what manner. So now I request if our participants have any comments, questions, clarifications to seek, the floor is open. Yeah. Any?
Yeah, you can either raise, yeah.
Yeah. Mahesh Kumarji. Yes, Mr. Mahesh Kumar, please.
Yes,
go.
sir. Yes. Ma'am, it's very interesting that you have shown many things. But I have a clarification on this. Like when you presented everything with your numbers, datas, and all, but when it comes to the fiscal share, particularly the issues about southern parts receiving lesser share and the northern parts receiving higher, it's because of the indicators has been changed in the previous finance commissions. So, and you have also been clearly pointed out that there is narrations, they have different narration giving and dividing the nations. In that perspectives are happening nowadays, even in newspapers. But ma'am, even certain things you have missed out. Why southern parts are even in particularly, they are beyond their limit of debt level. For instance, they have to taken care their aging populations. This aging populations very higher in the southern nations. They have to taken care even for particularly for the case of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. These are the highest share in their total population. So in that such cases, why can't this finance commissions, they are not considering this as one of the indicators, only rather than focusing on their population as a major indicator. If they taken it to consider, at least they may have also get their share properly. because these states, they have to equally consider this as one of the important things. So what is your take on this, ma'am?
No, I believe the Finance Commission formula is this 16 Finance Commission is starting its round of discussion where they're going to all states, listening to the views of all states, and this the share going to demography. It was based on population based on 1971 census, and 2011 was taken in. Then something about birth rates, so that states that have lower birth rates are not penalized. So they have included shares for all that, and I'm sure they could include for aging also if it's raised in their discussions. There's no problem with that. Demography has a large weight in the state finance commission's formula.
Sorry for interrupting. And then one more thing, ma'am. Like earlier, it was the devolution or fiscal share based on the performance of the states. But now the base is completely changing, that the poor state of the states means poor conditions of the things. So here you are bringing about the concept of equity as a first one. But when it comes to these many years, states like southern parts, they have achieved certain main developmental things, but the equity part when it play, they are not completely set aside them. And so in that,
No, I think I showed that
Yes.
these grants are, Ayushman, for example, much more of the money is going to the southern states because they're using it much more. They have a better medical infrastructure. So, on some respects, some states gain, on some respects, other states gain. But overall, it's like, the rich are taxed more as individuals so that there can be many schemes to help the poor. And ultimately, you want to bring up all citizens of India, you want to provide them equal opportunities. Yeah. And then if all citizens do well, are productive, India becomes much more prosperous, then all these problems we can take care of. If you see the last few years, we've had good growth, very good tax buoyancy, and there's much that we have been able to do. And so we'll be able to do more and more with more prosperity. No citizen will be able to improve facilities for all citizens. So I think we should look at that. I think because we have that opportunity, we should try to make sure that we use resources to increase that opportunity the most. That is the way. Already we are seeing that the poverty ratios have really come down. For so many years in India, we had stagnant, all through the 20th century. We had very low growth and poverty and all sorts of problems. The last 20 years of better growth post-reform, 90s, 20, 30 years, we've seen poverty come down drastically. Yeah? Yes, so now any other questions?
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for your presentation. So I want you to be more elaborate on your last point on the conclusion part, the voter awareness. So how the voter awareness can lead to a better structure of our federal system. So can you just please?
So I had this OUP handbook. I had a chapter that time. I just read Darren Asimoglu. And they had this Asimoglu and Robinson. They had this big fat this book about why some countries succeed.
Why nations fail.
Yeah, why nations fail and why. So the thesis was that democracy makes for more participation and generally innovation, and therefore they do much better. But the thing was, in India, we had democracy, but we were stuck, and we were often compared to China and so on. So why was it that, and it was, so my thesis was in that book, I'd elaborated in my chapter, in my introduction and so on, that because we had illiteracy, we were very unusual. In most democracies, it was only the literate who could vote, or the whites. Very often in the black population could not vote in the US in the beginning, that way. So we started with full political inclusion. But because of the heterogeneous population, the large poverty, the illiteracy, the communal aspects and so on, political parties were able to target that to build vote banks and to, rather than providing, the idea was that in a democracy, people demand education, clean air, water. So this voter demand, they were able to bypass by, playing on the worst kind of fears and inadequacies and jealousies and pitting one group against the other. So, voter awareness is required to overcome all that, not get caught to demand from the politicians what our constitution promises us: better public services, good governance, clean air, right to education, to good medical facilities. Yeah, because then there's nothing that can stop Indian people. We are very resilient, talented. Yeah, we can do a lot as we've been seeing over the past few years. So this is what I mean by voter awareness. Do not get caught in these political misconception stories and, demand delivery from government. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
So now I wanted to, if there are more questions, but if there are some economists from Orissa, tell me, what
Ma'am,
has
can I
Orissa
ask a
been doing?
question?
Yes.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Yeah, please do.
No, what actually Mahesh was asking, actually he's from Tamil Nadu, so
Hmm.
he was raising his concerns about Tamil Nadu. But if I say put the perspective in a different way, in fact, during COVID-19, we were trying to analyze actually the expenditure, or the fiscal management of all states, and we found that the rich states have never complied with the fiscal FRBM say rules, but these have been very well complied by the poor states, or say low income states. And particularly since you are praising quite a lot about Odisha, I am very critical of that fiscal management, and including Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Uttar Pradesh. These states have always complied with the FRBM norms. On the other hand, Kerala, Punjab, Maharashtra, West Bengal, they have never complied with the FRBM norms. So is it, first of all, when southern people always complain that we don't get the money? Ma'am has already pointed out that in per capita terms they have been getting more grants. Okay, that is one. And second, do you have some, since you have been working on macro issues, when some states don't comply with the fiscal norms and when they borrow more, how other states are impacted? Say whether there is a spillover effect in terms, say, inflation, or say the spread that you are talking about, whether other states are get the negative externality of this bad fiscal management of the rich states. And then coming back to say Odisha's fiscal management, yes, Odisha has been definitely achieving, doing good in fiscal management, but as you have also pointed out, it has a huge repercussion on the social sector, particularly health and education, and that has a severe implication on the inequality. Now there is a clear divide between, actually, say, the tribal versus non-tribals in Odisha. Okay? And because of the, if you look at the structure of the economy, now almost 50% of the output comes from industry, which hardly generates any kind of employment, very less employment. So that's why when the state withdraws or spends less on the public goods like health and education, that will really aggravate the inequality. And although state is spending quite a lot on the freebies, what we can say, on the transfers, but that will not have, actually, that will have a long-term implication. Particularly our health and education sector will be severely impacted in the future. And okay, so I think I'm taking longer time. And again, I think you had direct, probably your lecture had direct implication on the ongoing debate of Kerala versus the government of India. Would you like to throw some direct lights on those controversies? Because Kerala is now going to, or they are already in the Supreme Court. So what will be your response to that? I think I should stop here.
Yeah, so this is a really emotive issue, and we can see that in many of the questions. I think it's human psychology that you feel the other is getting, the grass is greener in the other lawn, or that you are worse off than the next guy, or your state is at a disadvantage. So the point is, you have an independent commission that carefully looks. There are so many complexities. You can't take care of everything, but most things which are raised and which can be attended to, there is an attempt to attend to it. But this thing about voter awareness, what you are saying, that Orissa is not spending enough on health education, these are the public. What is very important for that is true decentralization to that third tier, to build capacities there, because water and so on comes at that local level, the city. What is happening in Bangalore? They haven't had a municipal election for 2 years. And that Bangalore is a cash cow. I mean, so much industry tax they get from there, but they're just it's really tragic. So voter awareness, citizens, what do they demand? They should demand these sort of things, not get caught in whether transfers are going to one state or the other and so on. Because, there is a body of experts, independent, they sit and they deliberate and they come to some conclusions. And Kerala, for example, has been given deficit relief grants by the 15th Finance Commission. But they're still continuing with huge. In fact, so they say that their social welfare payments, their pension, they can't compromise on. But then you should need to raise more taxes. Their tax rates are very low on property and so on compared to even West Bengal. They don't collect enough, though they're a consuming state. They should get a lot of GST revenue, but they don't. You can use data, and it is an elastic revenue if you collect properly. So make that tax effort, right? And that is the way forward, I think. Yeah, voter awareness, demand for public services, asking for this decentralization, which the Finance Commission has been doing. CSS schemes, they go directly to the panchayats, piped water and so on. Like nutrition. Why was India had such poor, nutrition parameters, child head weight, as you see in the tribal areas and so on? It's because if you don't have cleanliness and sanitation, whatever you eat, you're not going to absorb it. Your body is not going to absorb it. So all this is a package. All this is really important for equality, to build human capital and the ability to, be more productive. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
Ma'am?
Aish, you have already asked 2 questions. If
I think he's representing the South here. So you can see the challenges the finance commission.
Manoj, I think
Yeah.
Manoj.
No, Ashima, I wanted to ask you about the state's own tax revenue.
What?
No.
I can't hear your.
I was asking you about the state's own tax revenue. That effort, as a percentage of the GSDP, it is more or less similar across poorer states and the richer states. My question is, why is it that the richer states are not able to raise more? Is it because of tax rates are more or less similar, or they are very, they are not able to enforce the mechanism, or it is just that the willingness of the state governments are similar across be a poorer state or a richer state?
I think one major reason is this absence of decentralization of functions. Because property tax, for example, all this is collected by the municipalities, and states don't want to give up. I don't know. It's not happening adequately. You need independent municipal governments and even the panchayats. So that is one major area. Then user charges, like Kerala. Actually, I was invited for a discussion with the finance minister, a group of experts this time, because the Supreme Court case, and they're saying we have to raise resources, and how can we raise innovative resources? So there are POS, the use of points of service, data from their GST. we cannot take a decision on how much states are raising. For example, we are seeing in the GST data, Northeast states are raising a lot of elasticity in GST taxes from the Northeast. So they don't have industry, but they have consumption. Yeah. So I think this picture of with our association of low tax, that the states will say we don't have the elastic taxes, so how can we raise? But there's a habit they don't charge electricity tariffs. Then the huge bailouts in the electricity sector. No. So that is a waste of national resources. I think Amarinder had this question that how does poor effort by one state affect the other? No, obviously, it will be inflationary as a whole if it's financed by deficits. Yeah. Although the central deficits are coming down, but the state deficits add to it. No. So overall, recently I wrote a paper for EGRO. There's an edited volume. So then the referee wanted me to look across countries, and I've been saying that India's deficit reduction is excellent, say compared to the US government. Where deficits have really been rising. And I had a graph on the central deficit, how it's a peak and it's falling the very next year. The fiscal consolidation. But if you add state deficits, then India still has one of the worst performing fiscal, compared to other countries. So this is how, although there are constitutional limits, if a state exceeds the limits, the central government can limit its borrowing. But like Kerala goes to the Supreme Court that the center is we are bankrupt, the center is not letting us borrow. Then what? So on the whole, this discipline has not been imposed adequately in India. There is one major discipline that work is if states that have higher debt have to pay more for their borrowing. So this RBI automatic debit mechanism, that stops. That is a discipline but in India we have this thing that we are a fiscal federation. We have to help states meet their requirements. So states that run high deficits, but as you're saying, they're richer states, so they're actually with a very poor expenditure management. That is why I was asking about Orissa. I was listening to a meeting with somebody from Himachal Pradesh, was saying, a government officer, that each government starts on schemes, expenditure.
Yep.
And then a new government comes, there's some interest groups around a scheme. No scheme will be shut. So there are 1,000 schemes running in Himachal Pradesh. Imagine how much money you're wasting on all this. If instead you had some rationalization. Again, I think Orissa has done a good job in that, in using technology to know what is happening in its budget, have better accounting. Payment should be much faster. The private sector really suffers because governments don't pay in time because they have elaborate procedures. So all these, I think one of our puzzles in the MPC is this core inflation coming down. We don't understand how this GST and those octroys we used to have in every state, borders, how much that has brought down costs of transportation and brought down costs for industry. So a lot of reforms are possible that can improve efficiency and better utilization of resources so they deliver more.
Yeah, thank you.
Abhishek, I think you raised your hand. Abhishek? No? I saw you had raised the hand. No, I think if there are no questions, we should wind
Sir, I
up.
have
Yeah.
But Jugal, I wanted to hear from you your experience in the Orissa government. What do you say about it?
Okay. Piyush.
Yes, sir. So, sir, how much the ambit of states' fiscal autonomy have been affected to the enactment of GST? I would like to ask from ma'am and you.
There is a GST council, which meets and decides all these things. And if the state has given up some autonomy, so has the center, right? It's all decided in this council. And there are still huge, the real tax cows, petroleum sector, which is out of the GST. And eventually that should come in because that saves a lot of this multiple, application of taxes that increases costs. makes India a high-cost economy. So I think to move towards a system, as it is, people say GST is too complicated, too many slabs. It should actually have lower slabs, and we still have a lot of informal and small. The formalization is happening in the number of people who are filing returns is really increasing. But I think the main autonomy, states have so much autonomy in taxes which they don't use. Property taxes. They have full freedom in that. Why don't they use charging user charges for local water supply, sanitation, garbage collection? These services charge and provide better services. People will be willing to pay more. Look at the people in Bangalore. You know how much they're queuing. We were seeing some pictures of queues for water and so on. They would be willing to pay if they got good water, And there is and then GST itself, state GST, there's very uneven performance across states. But if you improve your data collection at the point of sale, a lot of in this so-called informal sector is actually tax evasion, So you will be able to collect much more taxes. So you have a lot of autonomy. So don't talk about losing the ability to set tax rates. You have so much autonomy that you're not using at all. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think just for me to speak about Odisha finances would be a little immodest, because I was in charge of finances for a very long time. So.
And we have to thank you for Odisha's star performance.
And yes. Amarendra would call me the villain of the piece. So I take the good threats and accolades in the same vein. But just to give you some sort of brief thing, description of what's happened. Actually, we have learned the hard way. Actually, if you see our finances in the 80s and 90s, we're absolutely in shambles, and we have gone through extremely tortuous time. We were simply, we'll pay our salaries and close down our treasuries. That was the situation. We couldn't spend anything on welfare. So starting with 2000, when a new political dispensation came, fortunately more responsive in a way, more forward-looking. They had a much longer view of the situation. So I think the Odisha fiscal restructuring started. We started, sort of reducing our large bureaucracy in many ways. I mean, not in the critical core areas, but where we could, we would not fill up the vacant posts. So the costs of establishments, administrative expenditures were reduced. Debt swap was resorted to. High cost loans were brought down. Some debt relief from fiscal finance commissions did help. Tax efficiency, and that's one area you would see that between before 2000 and after 2002, there is a regime change in tax efficiency. So I think about a percentage point higher growth in taxes happened. And to our good fortune, the national economy started growing around that time. That was the golden period of growth, and we did really make full use of that. At the same time, on the expenditure side, also we sorted to some non-negotiable golden rules. The first thing that we will not, apply debt resources for any revenue-related expenses, any current expenditure. So we have to, if we have to raise debt, it has to be for capital expenditure. That's a golden rule that we did. And the second is we will not subsidize the power sector, unlike most states.
Excellent, yeah.
Absolutely. We said, I had, in fact, I have had long debates with the Chief Minister on this, and we are under tremendous pressure to provide revenue subsidy on tariff subsidy. But I said any amount of money for modernization of the system, improving system efficiency, any capital expenditure will fully provide, but no revenue subsidy. So some of these things have stuck. The entire fiscal system, as you said, technology application, modernization of the treasuries, tax systems, integration with the budgets, everything has happened. And, yes, I do take the criticism that we started on the expenditure, more expensive expenditure management side a little late. Our capital expenditures were low till about 2012-13. We have made conscious effort to raise it, and today, which is why we are at 3% and higher. So this is a work in progress, and I think the full credit to the very responsive government for a, I think, very painful fiscal restructuring that we could achieve. With a more seasoned veteran politician, possibly we couldn't have done that. So that's some of it.
Yeah, it's really, I see many of these, they're like this Scotch, and I don't know, Bank of America sends me there. Everywhere, Odisha is on top, no?
Yeah,
Best
that's right.
Best performing state. So Amarenda's problem, I mean, now you have money to spend on tribal welfare, isn't it? And governance, universities, for example. You were talking about this case, but so can they be given more autonomy? Can you spend smarter in that sense? Spend more on education, health.
I think these are areas, health and education, and even social security. And this is something that needs to be looked at, because as demography is changing, the expenditure on social security also is an area of concern. So these are, as I said, work in progress. I'm sure the government has already started addressing these issues, including tribal issues, development of the tribal areas. So I think the directionality of the policies are pretty good. Capacity building is taking
what about decentralization?
Decentralization is, we are in, I think Odisha would be in the middling. Odisha is not as good as Kerala in decentralization, but not as poor as UP or Bihar. It's middling, and some responsibilities have been given, but I think the functionaries part and sort of more resources more own resources raising need to be looked at. So yes, it's not the ideal situation as of now, but certainly the incremental changes are very, very, one can be very, very optimistic, sanguine about what's happening.
Good. Yeah. I always wonder why there isn't more convergence across states. You see something has worked somewhere.
Yes.
Other states, the possibilities are there. No, the political will is very important at that.
Absolutely. Correct. So thank you, Ashima. I think.
Thank you. I've learned a lot also. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I think we have had an excellent session on the fiscal federalism in India, and what is the true situation. What are the misconceptions, and are they really? She has done an outstanding fact check on each and every misconception about fiscal federalism in India. I'm sure the 16th Finance Commission will be dealing with many of these issues, and we thank you. We can't thank you enough for your giving your time and all your intellectual inputs and insights into this very, very emotive issue, as you said. Thank you very much, and I thank all the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Amarendra, vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think I don't have to repeat what Joel sir has already told. It was really an insightful session, and you have given us a summary picture of all the Finance Commission, and particularly this is very much contextual because the debate is going on between Kerala and Government of India. So that's how you have provided probably a right answer to it. But I think the debate will still be there. Some people will be still asking the questions. But I'm sure it will be a great tribute to Professor Adwait Mohanty and his 79th birth anniversary. So I thank again you as well as Jugal sir for establishing this connect and inviting you, and particularly you are holding such an important office, and we have read all your articles in different newspaper journals, and it was really a pleasure to have you here and directly listen to you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very nice interacting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Bye.